This is the gravesite of the Honorable Wallace Bruce. And a lot of elderly people here in our area will always take off their hat and put it over their heart when they say his name. But Wallace Bruce was from New York. He was a poet. He wrote more than 30 different books in New York. He knew everybody in New York that was anybody. So he's a very prominent figure up there. But he gets onto the committee that creates the Florida Chautauqua Resort Campus. And although he wasn't the leader of the Florida Chautauqua Assemblies for the first few years, he does build a home right on the campus grounds. And then he eventually does become the leader of the whole Florida Chautauqua Association and is running a lot of the programming of the assemblies that were going on year after year after year. So he served many, many years as the president, program chair, whatever modern terms you want to give it. But Wallace Bruce ends up, while serving here in Defuniak Springs on the committee, by the way, Julia Ward Howe, the author of Battle Hymn of the Republic, was also on that committee that created the Florida Chautauqua campus right here in Defuniak Springs. So he served with her. He is later contacted by President Benjamin Harrison to serve as President Harrison's Consul General to Edinburgh, Scotland. So Wallace does leave town, goes over to Edinburgh, and he's running the consulate there. And one day, a lady comes in and says, "Mr. Bruce, our Scottish men are buried right down the street. My husband died fighting in your American Civil War to keep the Union together, and he's buried right down the street. And I think that you owe us widows something." And so he agreed, and he got with President Harrison and got her the first reparations that America had ever given. So in addition to that, he erects a statue of Abraham Lincoln in that graveyard, honoring those men who died in our Civil War. Also serving at the time with Benjamin Harrison is Robert Todd Lincoln, all grown up, and he hears about this, and this is the first time that an American president statue is erected overseas. So Wallace Bruce and Robert Todd Lincoln become good friends. But Wallace Bruce dies in 1914. And he's still serving in the Florida Chautauqua Assembly, but he has a stroke. They place him in what is known today as the Octagon House, where he lives out his final days and dies of a stroke. His funeral procession is so long, according to all the historical accounts, that the beginning of the funeral procession obviously makes it to bury the Honorable Wallace Bruce, but the back end of the funeral procession never leaves Circle Drive, about a little over a mile from here. So that funeral was huge, and the sympathy letters that were sent to his wife was a huge book of letters that came from the White House, from Congress, and from all over America, and really all over the world. So all of those sympathy cards and letters indicate how prominent Wallace Bruce was and how much he was revered, even right here in Defuniak Springs, years later after his burial. But he had so many people coming to his gravesite that his wife decides to buy the lot in front of this gravesite for parking. So anytime that you come to Magnolia Cemetery and you're able to park right here in front of these family lots, you can thank Mrs. Bruce for that, because that's all she wanted people to do. This is Dr. Ralph Spires' grave. He died in 1966, but his contributions to our history was that he opened a one-story clinic on Circle Drive in 1939. What was unique about it was that it was segregated. And back in 1939, many African Americans could not find a white doctor to take care of them. So that made the clinic unique in that it was open to anybody who wanted to come in and get any kind of medical treatment. Infant mortality was very high at that time, but it was Dr. Spires who lowered the infant mortality rate amongst African American babies and white babies. So this was a huge impact that he had on this region of Florida because he had opened that clinic. 10 years later, and by the time 10 years later comes, he has partnered now as a business partner with Dr. Edgar Myers, and they decide to open up a second floor to the clinic. That second floor now makes the whole building a hospital. Again, it was segregated, but when he opened up the second floor, he decided to build a ward for African Americans to stay in, a black female ward and a black male ward. It was the only time that they knew of back in 1949 that there was an integrated hospital. Even though it was segregated, it was taking care of everyone. And that has now resonated into one of the only clinics that they know of in the Deep South that was open to serve everyone in the community. Therefore, his contributions, even though he dies in 1966, the hospital no longer exists after 1972. The building still stands and today is on the National Register of Historic Places because of its unique role in our American history. This is Mr. Stockman, Mr. Tom Big M. Stockman, and you'll notice that Stockman is in parentheses. He's a slave from Angola, Africa, who died in 1936. He's the father of 136 children. Carrie B. Oates, who lies next to him, is one of them. Doing the research, for him to have died in 1936, it might have put him in his 90s if he came here prior to the Civil War, when slavery was legal. But it was illegal to go to Africa and get any slaves. So how could he have come from Angola, Africa, unless he came in on an illegal slave ship? So there were 2 illegal slave ships that came in, within a couple years apart. One was the Clotilda, and the other one was the Wayfinder that came directly from Angola, Africa. So he would have been maybe 13 years old to come over here. Now, to be the father of 136 children and with the last name of Stockman that he was given, he didn't come here from Africa with the last name Stockman, but that was the term that was given to male slaves who bred female slaves. So that's likely how he got his last name, and that's why it's in parentheses. So he was placed on a breeding farm to continue to produce slaves because they could not legally go to Africa and get any more. So after the Civil War, then he's free. And so how he ends up in Defuniak Springs is still a mystery. But we do know that one of his so-called owners was on the border of Alabama and Georgia, in a small community there, where there is a Tom Stockman listed in the census record. We do know, too, through Ancestry, a lot about his DNA is located right around there. And he's got half of his DNA descendants are in Georgia. And there's a lot that's in Alabama. But why he's here in Defuniak Springs, we just don't know. It's the big mystery.